Hey everyone, we have a couple more people coming on, it looks like, so we'll give it another minute. In the meantime, I'll pull up the document we'll be working from. Thanks for being here.
Okay.
Hey Marge, what's up?
Yeah. Hi. I have to leave at 11, so I just want to say that. So I'll just sign out then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and get started because I want you to be able to participate as much as possible. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Sam has proposed a new schedule that I'm going to pull up briefly. And I just wanted to, I'm going to pull up the schedule briefly, and then we'll go into findings and recs, and then we'll go into the rest of the document here. And unfortunately, Sam won't be able to join today, but he asked me to go through this with you. I'll do a pretty high overview of just sort of the major changes to the schedule. Does everyone see that? It should be a calendar view.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna try to zoom in as much as I can. So I'll go through this pretty quick. The main difference that we're seeing here is where this draft 5 issued comes into play. So the proposed new date for draft 5 release is on March 15th, as opposed to, I think the last version was March 9th. So what that does, it means that we can meet this week. Potentially, depending on what we need to do, it means we can meet next week and possibly even for very final revisions before draft 5 is issued on either the 13th or 14th. So in addition to today's meeting, it gives us the opportunity for 2 more meetings if needed. So I just wanted to go over that with the group. The other major items on this list is a outreach opportunity at the Sustainability Coalition Fair, where the county has a table. So it gives us the opportunity to talk about the BCTT process a little bit and essentially tell folks about the public engagement and survey opportunities that will be coming in the following weeks. There's also a proposed virtual town hall that same day for folks that aren't going to be at the Sustainability Coalition Fair. And then the major items for public survey opportunities is essentially a public survey opening on March 16th, same day as the next work group meeting, running through the 23rd, or sorry, running through the 21st. So just shy of a week of a first public survey about draft 5. And I wanted to note here too, draft 5 on the 15th, the idea is it'll be released without an appendix. So that'll be without our subcommittee's attached reports, but it will include findings and recommendations. So I think the idea is we need to nail down findings and recommendations as a priority. And then in the meantime, while that's being reviewed for that week before draft 6 comes out on the 20th with the appendix, we need to solidify what our, make any very last minute changes to what the subcommittee report looks like. That being said, findings and recommendations are based on the work that we've done. So we should have that pretty well organized and ready to go before the 15th. There are 2 work group meetings proposed, one on the 16th and one on the 23rd. I think the 16th is essentially the opportunity to finish the work that was done in the last work group meeting, which is reviewing all the findings and recommendations. And then the one on the 23rd is to do the formal final polling. So that's a difference. I think we only had the 16th scheduled originally for work group meetings. I also wanted to point out there's going to be another public comment period It might be a survey. I'm not exactly sure how it looks, what it's going to look like, but essentially on April 4th, there'll be a virtual open house for folks to answer and ask questions. After that open house, there'll be a public comment opportunity for just over 1 week from the 5th to the 14th. And then the Board of Commissioners will be receiving a presentation as well as all the public comments received at the 18th at one of their Board of Commissioners meetings. And that's the 18th of April. So I know that's a lot. Any questions, any feedback? I think Sam is asking for feedback from the group. He wants to see what this proposed schedule. Yeah, John.
This question, so the virtual open house on the 4th, is that something we need to attend or recommended, expected 5 to 7 on the April, that's April 4th?
Okay. I think it's encouraged for folks to attend.
Okay.
I don't think it's required, but my understanding is I think as many people that can be there to potentially answer questions from subcommittee perspectives or work group member perspectives, that would be really helpful.
Okay. And then my other question is, so we're adding a work group meeting on the 23rd?
Yes.
Okay. And that is from, oh, there's 2 comment periods. What?
So
Oh, the meetings.
Yeah, so this is actually another one. We're noticing here this 1:30 mark. Those are extended times. Obviously,
Okay.
our meetings normally start around 3, I think. So this would be an hour and a half added to the beginning of these, and we have 1:30 marked for both the 16th and the 23rd. The 2 public comment periods is essentially the proposed idea here is the time slot that public comments would be received during that meeting. It would be split in half. So at the beginning of the meeting from 1:45 to 2:15, there'd be a half-hour opportunity for public comment. And then at 5 o'clock to 5:30, there'd be another half-hour for public comment.
That meeting on the 16th and 23rd, both of those will still be at the Calapooya building?
Yes, the 23rd might not be, the 23rd won't be in the same room, but it'll be at the Calapooya building.
Okay.
Any other thoughts? Oh,
Yeah,
I
I just think it's very robust. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for public comment, which I think it's good.
Yeah, thanks, John. So I have Ryan and then Sean.
Yeah, so on the added meeting on the 23rd, is there an idea? I've got a commitment from 2 to 3:30 in Salem already that's been on the calendar for a couple months. Is the voting going to occur at the end of the meeting, or is it going to occur throughout the meeting?
That's a really good question, Ryan. I don't 100% know. I can check in with Sam on that. But that's a really good question for folks, especially with that extended time period for folks that can't make the meeting. I can imagine there's gonna be a lot of time needed to go through and vote. So I can imagine it would make it within that sort of 2 to 3:30 time frame. But let me check with Sam and see when that, and I'll ask him to reach out to the group and clarify some of those proposed details.
Thank you. Yeah,
thanks, Ryan. Go for it, Sean.
I guess it's just for a process of, so is there an intent, does Sam have an intent that in the public survey that those comments could potentially adjust the report? Because I'm just thinking that's the day before. And then did I see something on the 4th of an open house? And I was just, so that, or something, yeah, so in the open house, there's nothing the public can actually do. It's just, hey, here it is. I'm just trying to see are we actually asking the public to respond and provide recommendations, or is it just, here you go?
Yeah, good question, Sean. So what I what I understand with this first public survey is obviously timed to end just before that final polling. And I think the idea is the public survey is going to look a bit like polling. Essentially, how much do you agree or disagree with this
Okay.
finding or this recommendation? And then gives room for sort of a narrative response to that as well. And I think the idea is that would be wrapped up in a way that the work group can at a glance see how much folks generally agreed or disagreed with this statement. So it might impact the way the work group is approaching their polling, but I don't think there's going to be enough time to change any sort of content of the report at that point. It would purely be, how the work group polls. And then the second public comment period, I think, is more for the Board of Commissioners. This is public comments that would be added to the public comments already received and put into the report when it's presented to the Board of Commissioners, saying, hey, here's the report, and then here's how the public responded to the report, both in one packet. But it wouldn't alter the report's structure or anything.
I maybe to convey to Sam, just in my government experience, if there's an open comment, there is usually an expectation by the public that if I take the time, that it's either going to be, there's going to be something out of it if it's before. And just because of the robust conversation and activities throughout this entire process, I'm just kind of hopefully setting expectations from the public that yes, this is a comment, but it's not, you're not going to substantively change the report. So that's the only reason why I was asking. So thanks.
Yeah, really good point, Sean. And I think one of the questions that I had around this that sort of got answered is, how the public comment will be used functionally. And that is essentially in the BOC's response to the report, because here's a report of recommendations and findings to the Board of Commissioners, and then they choose essentially what to do with that information. So as much as we can clarify that your comments are really going to be targeted at how the BOC is going to potentially respond to this, I think that is a really sort of good way to frame it, because it is confusing how it is not necessarily going to really give the public a chance to weigh into the report to change the report. It would change the response to the report potentially.
I totally concur with that. So thanks for the clarification, Dan. I appreciate it.
And thanks, Sean. Yeah, great questions. Anything else for Sam before we go into our document here? Marge, did you have anything? Don't want to call you out. I just don't see on my, oh, there you go.
No, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Okay, and Brian, are we good? All right, excellent. So let's go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing this. I'll pass that information along to Sam. Thank you so much. I'm going to pull open the report. I'm going to pull up the full report that I'm working from, just as our draft. It's the same findings and recommendations that you saw for the work group meeting. In comment bubbles, I've added the comments from the work group meeting so we can go through those. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to try to make this bigger for you. As I mentioned earlier, I think just based on the new proposed schedule, what we have to do is focus on findings and recommendations, make sure those are nice and neat, and then spend the rest of the meeting just going through the report. And that will help determine how many more meetings we need. So if we can get through the whole report and it's looking good, we might not need any additional meetings, but let's see how far we get. Does that sound good to the group? Okay, send some thumbs up. Excellent. All right.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, Marge.
Okay, you didn't send out this version that has the comments on it, right?
No, I didn't.
You didn't, because that, to me, that would have been so helpful to be able to look in advance what we were going to cover. But now being presented with it, and I'm on an iPad, I can switch to my PC, but it's really small print. Okay, but that's a distraction. I mean, just in general, it would be helpful to get information like that. Well, at least a day in advance so that you could kind of prepare what you wanted to say. That's all. Thank you.
No, thanks, Marge. And I definitely don't disagree at all. I really wish I had the time to get this over to you all well in advance. So I really appreciate that comment, and I apologize for not being able to do that well ahead of time, because that's certainly my goal as well. I don't want to spring information on you. So I apologize for that, Marge. All right, so at the top, I had a couple comment bubbles that we've had running. These are just like things that I've captured. This is a note from Ryan last month, essentially saying it is looking good, more or less. So I'm gonna flag these comments, and I think we can go ahead and start deleting some of them. I think this one from Ryan is, we've addressed it, and we can move down the list essentially at the comments here. And then I also wanted to just point out if there's anything else that we need to add that aren't related to the comments specifically, feel free to shout them out. Yeah, Sean.
Sorry about that. And I need to apologize. I was just my schedule did not allow me to be at the last meeting. So if I say something that was last month that I just missed via the minutes or something, my apologies. One thing I didn't see in here that I just kind of noticed at our last meeting was a lot of acronyms. And it wasn't just in ours, like the SMMP. I think we know what that RFP is. If it is for the public or commissioners, I think, again, I don't think it's just us. Perhaps Sam or yourself or whomever, or I'm more than happy to help with that as well, just to scan and at least turn the first use of these, the acronyms. We're all guilty of acronym fouls.
Yeah.
It just kind of hit, hit the last one. So it just a general comment. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. We actually went through last week and put together a list of acronyms and a glossary just across the board. So it'll be at the very front of the document. Yeah, so the next draft 5, everyone will see that. So hopefully we capture as much as we can here. So I'm going to go ahead and resolve this one from Ryan. Let me go ahead. I'm going to focus on the notes from the 223 meeting first. Just make sure we get through all those, and then we'll come back and just go through the findings and recs, make sure it's looking good. But I think those are the most pertinent. So this first one is on finding number 5. The research and development aspects of the planning process can occur concurrently with public engagement. The first point was we need to add context to this, and potentially kind of how it relates to the timeline of the RFP process. But essentially people were asking, what does this mean? We don't really understand what this is. And this is sort of the challenge of having findings outside of the context of the report. So we might need some context, maybe saying something like, as it relates to the timeline of the report writing and development process or something.
Yeah, I think we could say maybe as a lead in context, there are aspects of the work to be performed that are technical in nature or require or lend themselves toward extensive research that the consultant may engage in at the same time as obtaining public comment. It's much more lengthy than we had, but I like my concurrent word, but we're not gonna, I don't think we're gonna get away with it.
I was curious to kind of jump on that one, John. The confusion I heard was, why do we need this? And I think that we're all in agreement that some word like expedite, to expedite the process, that
Yeah.
it's not linear, like we have to do the research, and then only when we're done with the research can we go
Yeah.
on to the public engagement. Only can we do that, can we make a recommendation. It's like in order to expedite the process, elements of the process, don't laugh, something like that, can be done concurrently. Just to kind of give
Yeah.
a rationale why, because otherwise this would take 18 years if we just have to go A, B, C, D.
Exactly. Yeah, that's even better. I agree that expedite is a good word. And we can't, the challenge is we can't get specific here about the timeline. It would handcuff the consultant.
Yeah.
I think too much.
So let me read off what I have so far. I honestly, I think maybe combining Sean's and John's sentences might capture this. So leading it off, there are aspects of the work to be performed that are technical in nature or lend themselves towards extensive research that the consultant may engage in at the same time as public engagement. In order to expedite the process, elements of the process can be done concurrently. And then so that could potentially replace what we had as the research and development aspects of the planning process can occur concurrently with public engagement. So I think we have the sort of the what and the why here in those first two sentences. I know it's wordy, but are we missing anything? Does it get the point across?
Yeah, so we could just remove the third sentence.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, so there are aspects of the work to be performed that are technical in nature or lend themselves towards extensive research that the consultant may engage in at the same time as public engagement. In order to expedite the process, elements of the process can be done concurrently.
How about we, so it's not process, I was just kind of spitballing, something like procedural elements can be done concurrently, something on those lines.
That sounds
And then
good.
the same with engage and engagement, maybe that the consultant may conduct
I like that.
or
Public.
That's
Oh,
cool.
yeah.
I like that.
may conduct at the same time. Yeah. So
That sounds great. Any other thoughts with this one?
I think that was the fastest wordsmithing of a paragraph I've ever experienced in my life. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay, so we got the context timeline piece of it. Some other notes here. Consider public engagement outside of the county. I think we're going to get into that later on when we talk. There's a couple more items that relate to public engagement, specifically our CAC proposed recommendation, as well as our, who should be at the table. So if it's okay with the group, we can cover this later. Maybe it doesn't have to be covered in this bullet or in this finding. So then the other two items we have are consultant would help define. So this is to Sean and John's points of the consultant would help define what this timeline looks like. And I think we cover that pretty well, saying that the consultant may conduct at the same time as public engagement, and then explaining the why, that it's to expedite the process. Should we add anything to help sort of clarify that we're hoping the consultant takes the lead on sort of defining what that looks like? Yeah, we have Marge and then Sean.
Oh, yeah, just a nit, but if you said certain procedural elements can be done concurrently. What?
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Marge. Sean?
I guess I was, again, just kind of thinking down the road. I mean, we put a lot of stress on the consultant, but the committee itself, this future work group, could also change these. I just don't know if that's something, to go through the whole document, consultant and or work group. But I agree that in general, that the process in and of itself would define some of these timelines. And like we also say, I think somewhere down the line of the definitions of circular versus cradle to cradle. So just my initial thought of I'm curious what helped define, but also the committee itself. So for whatever it's worth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So we don't necessarily want to call it out as the consultant, but that it could be defined. The timeline can generally, maybe we can add something at the end saying, you know, the timeline can generally be defined throughout the process or something. Does that
I concur
sound?
with that. I like that approach.
Okay, so I just added the timeline can generally be defined throughout the process as a clarifier there. Okay, and then we had another note just to consider making recommendation to include rural areas of the county. So that I think we should talk about that when we talk about public engagement. Generally, we have a few notes on that. So I'm going to leave this one open so we can come back to it, make sure we don't lose any of those. So let's go through recommendations. So just high level recommendations. We had a couple. One was highlighting 2040 more. So in this first R1, we talk, you know, we had made essentially our first recommendation is really the first work product of our group is we came up with this kind of big overarching recommendation, which included as one of the points in there that the 2040 Thriving Communities Initiative and our community's core values should be considered. And Marge had a point, I think a good one, that 2040 should be highlighted more sort of outside of this R1. Does anybody disagree with that? And do we have any ideas on how we can do that, whether it's a finding or a recommendation? We have Brian and then Marge.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if you include it as a finding, just to acknowledge all the work that was done in that 2040 Thriving Communities process that should definitely be incorporated into the SMMP.
That sounds great. And
Yeah, and my
yeah,
comment was just along the same lines. The core values are already incorporated in any projects that the Board of Commissioners consider. And so in that respect, it's a finding that this is something that's already to some degree incorporated, but we want to make it real here. I mean, that's me speaking. Sorry, that's an editorial comment, that last part.
yeah, so that is a great point, Marge. I just want to make sure I'm capturing this. So I'm starting to draft this finding. We have 2 points. One of it, hey, this work has already been done. And then it sounds like we have another point saying it should be front and center in the SMMP development process. Am I capturing those?
Yeah.
Yep.
And Sean, maybe to this finding, so we're saying the work has already been adopted by the county, which highlights the county's core values. Is that a fair way to express it? I'm asking Sean because he did a ton of work on this.
I would phrase it if the finding is, how would I phrase this? So if we want to do it that would start the 2040 Thriving Communities work has been adopted. I wouldn't say the work. I would say the 2040 Thriving Communities identify our community's apostrophe core values and has been adopted by Benton County government.
And then I think we should say something like that. It should be core to what we are doing. You know, it should be a core part of the framework within which we work. Is that too extreme?
I don't want to I would getting back to, I'm going to share with you my thoughts on that, Marge, and then let's talk this through. I don't want to have a situation in which, and I think this has kind of inched to that representatives or the constituents have an expectation that because we have these core values, a decision is already met. It is meant as a lens, and maybe that's something we can specifically put in here, that Benton County uses the core values as a lens when making high-level policy decisions. But I don't want to have an expectation to say, oh, we have these counties, so we can't develop, or we can't build roads, or we can't do those kinds of things. And so I think however we want to create that language, but it is a very high level lens that the commissioners and leadership use when making these high level policy decisions, but it's not like a check mark. So however, I'm kind of leaning into Daniel also, like how to wordsmith that.
Well,
So
actually, in the Board of Commissioners minutes, it actually is a checklist.
Correct, but that's identifying which topics, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to make a decision and then it's predicated on a core. That's, I just don't want, I want to set expectations from the public that a diverse economy that fits. Okay, we can't have any more business in the county because it's not diverse, or that it's that at that level.
Right.
And
No,
so
I understand. It
I
has
just
to
wanna
be realistic. It's a realist.
Correct.
But actually, I like what I see on the screen here. Should use it as a high level lens. And I like that it's now a recommendation. You know, it's on its own. So I'm happy. Yeah, for now.
how does that look for the rest of the group? To read it out, we have Benton County should use the 2040 Thriving Communities Initiative as a high-level lens to frame our community's core values in the SMMP.
And it's a recommendation. It's on its own.
In
Yeah.
developing, in developing the SMMP.
Yes. Okay, I like all of that. And I have to go. So and thank you.
Thank you, Marge.
Yeah.
Hey, Daniel, we're just diving into the nitpicky. Since you have core values capitalized in the previous paragraph, you should probably capitalize like 3 words to your left. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Now we'll capture that up here too.
I feel very weird right now because March left. But I was just sharing, is that redundant to any of you and Daniel? The fact that we say it in the first and then say it again in the second? I'm asking a question, that's all.
I definitely see the redundancy from the first to the second. I think I'm okay with leaving the first one sort of as like a big picture. Like the first one, I see it as, you know, the SMMP should include these like core elements, and I'm happy with leaving that the way it is, and then diving into more specificity if needed. But I'm open to exploring it more with the group.
I just want to ask a question. Thanks.
Yeah, I think at this point also some redundancy probably isn't the end of the world. I think what we want to make sure we're not missing out on is, you know, key items that aren't included. I'd way rather include something twice generally, but.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's that important, not only to Marge, but I think it is that important. And I think they're said 2 different ways. So they're included in these recommendations 2 different ways. And the way I'm reading it, it's a little more broad scoped in the first one. And then when we've just added, kind of it reemphasizes that in the development of the SMMP, it's included in the first one as one of many items to consider in developing the SMMP. So I don't know. Some will see it as redundant, but I think it's worth it.
Well, thank you both. So we have a couple other sort of high level ones before we go into the specific notes on the recommendations. So first, I think this was another point that Marge made during the work group meeting, was that right now we don't have a recommendation that really specifically highlights that the SMMP should look at unique aspects of Benton County, or should reflect unique aspects of Benton County. And I know we've talked about that a fair amount, and we've added that to our list of topics to, you know, I think it's in our list of questions that the SMMP should answer, essentially how the SMMP work will relate to the unique aspects of the county. Do we want to add that as a recommendation specifically here? Open to the group.
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, typically in requests for proposals, you have a section that describes the county and demographics and all kinds of different ways to describe it. I mean, that's where that information probably should go. You know, where the things that could that we want to emphasize about the county that would impact, you know, be significant things to consider, such as, you know, a major university population, major university institution, highly agricultural. I bet you could pull it right out of the 2040 plan. I don't know if it's there, but
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this? Yeah, Sean.
I concur with that. I mean, every county, every community is unique in some way, shape, or form. Is kind of a given. I also I can't remember the paragraph we created from at the beginning of our full report, not just the recommendations, but I thought we had some, hey, Benton County is a great place to live, that kind of stuff. I don't see it as a recommendation. I'm kind of with John on that one, but just more of either in the intro or at the end, like he was saying, just somewhere in there, just saying, I don't know, a recommendation to say, hey, we're unique is kind of like, hey, I'm breathing. I'm not saying that as to be a full rec. That's my opinion. That's just my opinion.
Thanks, Sean. Any other thoughts on this? Sounds like we're leaning towards leaving that out as a recommendation for now. Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Well, I'll take that as a note here, mainly so we can double check the report and just make sure we're capturing that adequately in the body of the report. The other piece here is there's a note on, and really kind of a question is how do these recommendations relate to the implementation of these kind of specific items? So for instance, if we're talking about, you know, topics to be covered, or, you know, questions that we want the SMMP to answer, the question from the work group is essentially, how is that going to be implemented? And my initial response was essentially, you know, that's for the RFP process and the consultant to sort of tell us how all these things will be implemented. And I think that is sort of the sense that I've gotten from the group's discussion. So it's just a matter of maybe capturing that, making sure we explain that somewhere. I don't know. I wanted to bring that up and see if anybody had immediate thoughts on that.
my thought back on the 23rd was that good plans, I think plans that I have embraced have had a good breakdown of you know, major goal areas, categories, action plans or action items, prioritizing them in some way, or at least recommending that, and something to work from, for the commissioners to work from, and for the county to work from, and say, you know, and a plan is a plan. It's not set in stone, but the gradation of you know, how it gets implemented. There's, you know, certain things might need to come first and prioritize them to happen. So I don't know where that in our recommendations that happens. What are you thinking, Daniel? There's another place you're thinking of?
Well, so we capture a little bit. So like in the very first one, as our big first finding we sort of captured that with our long-term strategies, short-term action items, I'd like bullet in there. But then another place that it could potentially relate to is when we go into the RFP sort of design piece of it, like what we're expecting from this RFP. We could mention something along those lines that we are specifically asking for, sort of not just the implementation plan for the RFP, like not just for the work to build the SMMP, but in the SMMP to include the work on how these items could be done. I'm just not sure if that's, in my mind, that's sort of built in. It's a plan to outline that. So it seems built in. I think that's why I didn't really consider it. Yeah, Sean, sorry, I just saw your hand.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I might be a little too rigid and myopic, but I remember the very first meeting all the way back seemingly years ago that said something to the effect of, our job is to make the table of contents. I think just commenting on the RFP, I've always been a little weird about, because like county's going to do what they are, but if we're going to have it in there, I agree with you, and I think it was a little above. The RFP should address the subject listed, which I think we need to get into answering the questions and potentially developing. I just want to leave an implementation plan or something like that. I mean, they're very loose, because I don't think it's ever been our charge to say, hey, it has to do these things. It's been our charge to write the table of contents and maybe things to consider. So I just want to make sure, from my perspective, from within the government, of something to the effect of, hey, these are the things we should, but that's not our charge. That's not our job. So just try to contain what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I mean, I think, if we included in this R10, for example, if at the end we say and include an implementation plan for that, I don't think that's outside of our charge in my mind. I think that's fair to comment on. Yeah, Brian.
So, I mean, do you want to say, as far as, to that level of including an implementation plan, or do you want recommended courses of action? I mean, again, I'm trying to think of the Board of Commissioners and staff involvement, that you want to have that flexibility, that you don't want your consultant saying you should do this by this, and this date, but more of that kind of those recommendations of what comes from this whole SMMP is actions that should be taken, and then leave the timing and the when and where, how and why, all that other stuff up to the community and staff and commissioners.
That sounds good to me. So I just replaced that last one and include recommended courses of action. And I think that really sums it up, where we're asking for this, especially the sort of set of recommendations that we've seen in other plans that is delivered to the county, and then the county has the opportunity to sort of take those as needed in the context of other county work that's being done. Does everyone like that? Is that okay to include with R10? I think it looks pretty good. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So we're through that first part. I'm going to go ahead and resolve this. So the next one, let's see. So in R4, we have a note saying an aspirational goal should be included of how materials in Benton County can fit within a circular economy framework. So the note was to remove aspirational, should just say a goal. And I think aspirational ended up being added and removed and added again. But I think the aspirational piece came from feedback from DEQ's representative in the work group meeting, essentially saying, something to the effect of circular economy is one model, sustainable materials management is another model, zero waste is another model. And so this word aspirational was thrown in there, saying we're not necessarily going for circular economy specifically, but any path to that sort of end is going to get us on the right track. Essentially avoiding having to define specifically what sort of framework and model is going to be used eventually. I don't know. I just wanted to give that context here from what I understood and see what the group thought. I'm not necessarily sure that aspirational is needed here, but just want to see if anybody has strong feelings on how to address this. Yeah, Brian.
So I guess me being outside playing in here, right? In Benton County is the way I hear it from everybody that's been at the table is they want this to be a goal. They
Yeah.
don't want it to be aspirational. They want to see this within that SMMP framework as evaluated, deliberated, whatever it is that it needs to be brought forward. So I don't think it's an aspirational. I believe it to be a goal of the community.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing that as well. Ryan, and then Sean.
So if it turns into, I mean, if we say that this is the goal, what you said earlier about, DEQ's, perspective as far as there's more than one path forward, are we then, kind of crafting this in a way that that is the only outcome? I'm not disagreeing that's not a great outcome, but are we limiting the potential path to a solution? So just question.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Ryan. I'm wondering, I think depending on how we treat this, we should focus our attention on the circular economy framework piece of this and maybe add a qualifier or, something here so that we're not necessarily telling the consultant, hey, this is the framework that your analysis has to lead to, but something to the effect of shifting the framework away from solid waste management to something more circular. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. Sean.
Maybe we can switch this. I'm totally with Ryan. Something goals or specific goals should be included, and how Ben fits within the circular economy, cradle to cradle, or similar aspirational framework or something. But just flip to aspirational. That what we're really trying to do is get away from just material consumptive economy. I don't care if you call it a tuna fish sandwich, just whatever, get away from this, but whether it's circular or cradle to cradle or something like that, that's where my sustainability coordinator head is. So I agree. There should be specific goals, and then not corner a future group that you have to do one framework or another and let them decide what that is.
So I like that, Sean, and if you can repeat it just so I can get it tracked down on paper. So I got rid of aspirational. I put specific goals should be included of how I think maybe it's something else, maybe
Within a circular, and you all and Brian or whoever help, like something like circular economy, cradle to cradle, or similar aspirational framework or something like those.
And I guess we could, I think in that context, we could also get rid of aspirational here if we have similar. I think if we have circular economy, cradle to cradle, or a similar framework, I think we could get rid of aspirational. Yep. So we have John and then Brian.
Just another point. I was rereading the sentence, and there's a redundancy, and I think a little bit. Where am I? What number are we working on?
Oh, sorry.
Measuring.
R4.
So the result of the project should give us a method of measuring costs and benefits. You might want to take the hyphen out.
That can be measured.
Yeah, I don't think we need that. What we can say at the end is maybe to evaluate the social, the impact on economic, social, and environmental factors or indicators. I don't know if indicators is a good word, but
maybe metrics or indicators. I think either. Let's start with indicators.
Okay.
I like that.
So instead of that can be measured and evaluated, I think that's a lot more clear. Does that sound good to the group? Some nods. Okay. So that sentence, the result of the process should give us a method of measuring costs, plural, and benefits to evaluate the impact on economic, social, and environmental indicators. I think that looks pretty good to me. So Brian.
So kind of at the end, you talked similar framework. Do we want to kind of point this back to DEQ's 2050 vision plan where they've kind of laid out this whole concept as kind of a reference in the recommendation? Or do we want to leave it more generic like this?
I mean, I think that makes sense to call that out as a resource, but I also don't want it to imply that within that DEQ document, the consultant would like have to go. So I guess, any ideas on how to work that in?
Brian, how much, I haven't looked at the plan, that 2050 plan, how much does it talk about circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, this has become kind of the driving force of DEQ to move us away from basically, like you're saying, solid waste management to materials management, life cycle analysis. I mean, that's kind of the foundation of how they're taking us. And I guess that's what I'm kind of using as some of my marching orders and how we utilize and think about waste in Marion County. But I don't know if that's something that Benton County's embracing to that manner and that magnitude, or if it's just something that's, there as a resource. Yeah,
I mean, just the context of SMMP, we could have easily said, oh, we need a solid waste management plan. And a couple years ago, we specifically used DEQ's document to say we need a sustainable materials management plan, and very, very purposefully adopted that language and that overarching approach. So I think, I think you're right there with how the county has approached this. Yeah, Sean.
Can you just go up to one, that opening with the 2040, and don't we have something similar, reports or
national, state,
I mean,
local goals?
Brian, I'm looking to you. If that is such an end zone, like if we really as a county want to use that specific 2050 DEQ, if we're going to think we could identify it specifically in that one out of the gate. It's a question. Like we just kind of say national, state. We could say something management and climate change, specifically DEQ's 2050. I don't know what you call it, Brian, but
vision.
If we're going to specifically call out 2040, let's be specific with things that are really driving the train. And Daniel, I look to you. If the DEQ 2050 is something that we're really pushing, then I would say put in here as a guiding light throughout all the recommendations. That's
a great question, and I don't know if you guys aren't utilizing it. I mean, I kind of, when people ask me why are you doing this, I will kind of point back to that because of all the outreach and effort and stakeholder involvement with DEQ did as kind of that directive for us as a reason for, so to speak.
Would that help you or hurt you, Daniel?
Well, I'll go to John, but generally I think we have like a right now how we're approaching our program, which is certainly using DEQ's materials to like guide everything we're doing from a solid waste program perspective, and really shifting it from a solid waste program to a sustainable materials management program. But I don't want to necessarily say, hey, because that's what we're doing right now, that's going to be the context of what we're doing tomorrow. I think it will be at least part of it. We also did outline that 2050 vision in the documents to in the actual report. We say, here's other county reports, here's this 2050 vision that the state did. I think we also included their 2020 framework for action, or maybe those titles are switched around. But so I think we call it out enough that I don't think we're necessarily going to be losing out if we didn't call it out specifically in a recommendation. But John.
Well, I think it would make sense to call it out a little more, only because of a couple things came to mind. One is someone might be reading this that is not familiar with those terms or circular economy. And, you know, I think the way it is probably in that vision is it's explained. I think the other thing is that we have in later recommendations pointed out that we will need to get the collaboration and cooperation of other counties in Oregon to move this forward. And if we have pointed out a statewide document that is trying to direct all counties to move in this direction, I think that might help when we try to enlist the help of these other counties.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, John. And I definitely don't think we're gonna, I don't think we're gonna be limited if we call out the state's work on this. So I guess if we're leaning that direction, where should we put it? One idea is put it as a specific within this R1. Which I think might be a fitting place, just leading off the document saying, you know, all of these recommendations are sort of going to be in the context of these items. And so maybe we could roll it into number 2, maybe even add as parentheses and include that document. Does that make sense? I don't want to, I'm recognizing it's like a thick paragraph, so I don't necessarily want it to get lost in there if you think it will be.
I don't think so. I think it, no, you're hitting the big things. And if
Yep.
it's gonna be specific, that's the ball we're gonna carry, let's carry it.
Okay.
I like it.
And Ryan?
Oh, I like it, like you said, after state, maybe you put it in parentheses or do it somewhere in there, that it's tagged, and there you go.
Okay. All right. Well, with that said, let me, I'll put a placeholder in there and highlight it, and then I'll get the right title in there, and I'll put a link in. Does that sound good? Awesome. Okay. So I think are we good on R4 with that said? Perfect. So the next one, we're getting through this, R6. So there's a comment saying we should be highlighting international examples. And I think this was another one of Marge's comments where, you know, we have international examples called out here, say, as part of our lessons learned recommendation, saying, you know, so we said bring lessons learned into the process from other sources, including feedback from other counties, lessons from past Benton County experiences, examples from California, Washington, and international examples. See full report for more resources. So Marge's point, and I think maybe somebody else had brought this up, is, you know, where are the international, how are we calling out international best practices in this document? So the question is, do we do this adequately here? Should we bring international examples out and call it out on its own? I think that the gist of the conversation was, hey, other people in the world do it much better than we do it, being solid waste management. How can we call that out? I know we don't go into a lot of detail in the report about this. So I think the gist is we're asking the consultant to dive into this more and bring best practices globally. We're saying, don't look at it from necessarily just within Oregon, not necessarily just within the West Coast. Let's start thinking internationally. But what do y'all think? Yeah, Brian.
So what if you just kind of rearrange the sentence to call out international first? You know, it's Benton County experiences, international examples, as well as other state and local agencies or something like that, so that it just brings it to the forefront.
That makes sense. So you're thinking front and center, international example, including feedback from international examples, as well as other counties, lessons from past Benton County experiences.
Yeah, and then whether you even want to call out the states or just states in general.
Yeah.
the two states you've identified are, Washington and California. So maybe you could just say, West Coast states or something like that, because we're all kind of dealing with similar geography, weather conditions, or however you just kind of lumped together.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Any other thoughts here? Yeah, I think that's good, Brian. I think that really sets up the scope of what we're asking for, because immediately we're saying this is how broad, at least we're hoping that you're looking.
Yep.
So I think that's a good approach. Sean?
I can't believe I'm going to wordsmith this. My apologies. Including feedback, I don't think we're going to be calling other countries, maybe examples from, and then that way it's just all the way across examples from other countries, something like that. It just kind of caught me as like, I don't think we're going to literally
Yeah.
reach out to Scandinavia or something.
Yeah,
Maybe including
examples.
international examples as well as
Other counties. Yeah, something along those lines.
yeah, I was reading something in a journal yesterday. Brian, you may read Resource Recycling, and it was about the trends in beverage deposit laws and programs, and they pretty extensive internationally about how they're expanding them to more types of containers and different schemes to collect. And so I wouldn't go into that detail, but those are the kinds of things I would expect the consultant to not recommend specifically, but we can think of Oregon's container law program as being very advanced and good, and it's at 80%, which is a high, relatively high return rate, but it's not out of the question that it could be tweaked.
Yeah. Thanks, John. All right. Well, I think we might be good on this one. Any other thoughts? Okay. Perfect. So the next piece of feedback came in about R10. So it was the SMMP should address the subjects listed in the full subcommittee report, answering the questions listed as RFP priorities allow, and include recommended courses of action. So we did actually include, so this is where we added the recommended courses of action. And the note was explain in more detail, better highlight here essentially how this finding relates to those subjects to be subjects listed and our sort of table of contents that we put together. I think that the question came up was, what's going to be in the SMMP and where is that covered? And I said, oh, well, it's actually in this R10. We call it the subjects listed, but maybe we can do a better job of explaining that. So I just wanted to bring it to the group. Is this clear enough, or should we call this out a little bit better? Yeah, Sean.
Just to give it some context, maybe an intro section that the SMMP subcommittee researched other, however you want to call it, Daniel, other municipal or other jurisdictions SMMP plans, and what you discovered whatever you did months ago, which I thought was fantastic. We compared aggregated components and developed this, list of subjects, which should be addressed, blah, 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 or answering. So just to give it a little bit of context, and we did research this. We're not just pulling this out of thin air, and that the construct should at least address or evaluate everything that we found, something along those lines. That was the worst English in the history of mankind. Sorry about that.
So yeah, maybe this could evaluate and address. Let's see if I can. Add that here. So kind of adding that. So it says the SMMP subcommittee researched other jurisdictions, SMMP plans. Well, I'll just say plans for now because they're not quite. Other jurisdictions' plans compared and aggregated a list of subjects, and the SMMP should evaluate and address the subjects listed in the full subcommittee report, answering the questions listed as RFP priorities allow and include recommended courses of action. Yeah, Brian.
I like numbers. Do we want to throw the quantity of subjects listed as just so they understand it's more than one and less than 100 million or whatever? So
that's a good thought. So we have two. So we have our list of table of contents subjects, but then we also have our questions. Some of those overlap. I'm wondering how to address this because the questions don't necessarily address every line, but probably pretty close. I think if we were to categorize anything, it should be the questions, mainly because the table of contents includes things like introduction and, conclusion, like little, yeah, let me call this out. And if that works for the group, I can just add the number of questions that we came up with. Okay, so I'll highlight that here. I'll find the number of questions and I'll add it. Is that okay to do it there instead of the subjects listed? Okay, excellent. All right, any other thoughts here? Perfect, I'm gonna resolve this one. And if I don't see your hand or anything, feel free to just shout out because I'm juggling a couple screens here. Okay, so this one, I don't know if this actually came up during the meeting vocally, but as I was going through this, I think I might have taken a note here on 18. It says the length of the overall project will depend heavily on the level of public interaction / stakeholder engagement included in the project and by the requirements from the county. During the public interaction / stakeholder engagement process, R&D from consultant can occur in the background. So this is very similar to the finding. And I was going to ask, I think we already updated this can occur in the background language elsewhere, so we might want to rewrite that. And B, I think should we rephrase this as a recommendation, or should we just leave what we have already for the finding? Yeah, Sean, and then John.
I'm a fan of, like, you found something, so what do you recommend? So I like it. So my only comment would be to use not background but concurrently, or the same language in the finding, to kind of make sure it's closer in relation. So R&D from consultant and or work group or whatever we're calling the future thing can occur concurrently. So
yeah, let me go over to the finding and just copy that language so we have it to work with.
Like that. Yeah, I think that would be.
John?
I actually was gonna say we don't need it, but then it's in the recommendations and not the findings. So in that sense, I understand what you just said, Sean. So yeah, I think it makes sense as written in the form of a recommendation that is what should be done.
So here's the original finding that we had just came up with. There are aspects of the work to be performed that are technical in nature or lend themselves towards extensive research that the consultant may conduct at the same time as public engagement. In order to expedite the process, certain procedural elements can be done concurrently. The timeline can generally be defined throughout the process. So one approach here is essentially use the same language and replace can with should. So it looks something like, in order to expedite the process, certain procedural elements should be done concurrently. the timeline can generally be defined throughout the process, or the timeline should generally be defined throughout the process. Any thoughts with that? I do kind of like the intro of number 18. The length of the overall project will depend heavily on the level of public interaction, stakeholder engagement included in the project, which I don't think we really capture. Yeah, Brian.
But should, again, even that be more of a recommendation, is something along the lines that time should allow for, you know, a heavy level of public interaction. I mean, something along that lines. Because I think that's the intent, is that we want to make sure that people understand that this could take a long time, and you need it to take a whatever is required for that public engagement. And then to the point of the finding is that things can happen concurrently if managed appropriately to kind of help minimize that length of time. So, you know.
So yeah, that's a great point. John.
I may have to jump off. I just want to let you know that I have this something I need to do. So I'm just letting you know in advance.
Okay, thank you. Sean.
I really like what Brian, I was going to say the same thing. I like the recognizing there should be involvement, and then cutting the first sentence, there are aspects, cut that out, and then just skip right to, in order to expedite these and other procedural elements can be done concurrently. Something like that.
Okay.
And then I think it links to the finding.
Okay. So what I did with the first one, I took the first sentence. I did not take the second sentence, so I can remove the second sentence if that's okay. So what it looks like now is this middle one. The length of the overall project will depend heavily on the level of public interaction / stakeholder engagement included in the project and by requirements from the county. Time should allow for extensive public interaction and engagement. In order to expedite the process, certain procedural elements can be done concurrently. The timeline can generally be defined throughout the process. All right.
My only thing, since it's a recommendation as opposed to a finding, what are your thoughts on the timeline should generally be, or changing it from can to should, since this is an actual recommendation? I was trying to, what are your thoughts on changing that, since we are actually recommending this, so you should do those things?
That sounds good to me. So we have the should in the timeline and how the timeline is defined, and then we have the should in certain procedural elements should be done concurrently. So we could say should both places if that works. Okay. And my computer has, okay. Whew. That was got a bit of sweat on the brow.
Walking off the ledge there, Daniel.
Oh man. I would be lying if that didn't happen several times a day. Okay. Perfect. All right. Any other comments on that one? Excellent. Okay, so I think this might be our last note here. It says they would like to see more community engagement than a CAC. So this might be a broader point leading back to the earlier comments that were made in the findings. And so it related to this R-20 recommendation. So we said include a technical advisory committee which vet technical information from a consultant and get to a place of consensus, and a community advisory committee, CAC, which provide review in the technical experts areas of disagreement. SMMP subcommittee members should be included in the CAC. So I think they read this recommendation, and we're looking across the whole SMMP process and saying they would like more community member involvement than just in the CAC, which I think is sort of how we framed our discussion. I think that was the intent, but I don't think we really called that out very well, because we call it out in the CAC, and then there's another item, let's see, where we talk about the other involvement, let's see.
Well, we also just finished finishing a sentence about extensive stakeholder involvement. I'm reading that throughout. I was curious if we could separate those two sentences and to say in front of the CAC a phrase like, in addition to extensive public engagement, add a community advisory committee. So like, hey, we're going to go out to the community, but in addition, we should probably have 6 to 8 folks that are just looking at that one. That was just kind of a recommended. I don't know what Brian and Ryan think.
I think that's a pretty good way to frame that up and just make sure that we're capturing that engagement elsewhere. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, and again, I think I've mentioned this before in the past in Marion County, we utilize our SWAC as kind of that public body vetting process as pieces of the, your master plan is being put forward, right? That as a kind of each area has been vetted through the public and everybody else, they're kind of more of that review body before it goes on to the commissioners. And do you see the TAC and the CAC being those bodies versus your SWAC?
So I think we call out SWAC earlier.
Yep.
Let's see. So we say that SWAC DSAC should have an advisory role during the development of the plan.
Yep.
So I don't necessarily see CAC different than SWAC, but
Okay.
I think framing it this way does 2 things. One is we call out their specific role. We can say, here's how community members can come in and basically help out where there's areas of disagreement within the technical expertise of the document. And I like that it potentially opens up the door to, let's say the CAC consists of SWAC members, maybe specific SWAC members, or all of SWAC, in addition to other people who we already said should be at the table. It sort of opens the door to that, which I like. Because I think the challenge with SWAC is losing out on other critical areas, like, that entire list we put together of folks who should be at the table.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, Sean.
2 things. One, I love what you said, Daniel, because I was thinking of NRAC. I think that's another county group advisory committee that should be part of whatever this is. And I know you and I and Darren have talked about it, but actually this question is for Brian. So I'm looking at this and others as in, so we're going to embark upon the next 2 years to develop our SMMP. Internally, there's going to be some group of citizens that is going to be utilized in the process. Then that plan is complete, wrapped in a bow, and then it's implemented throughout the county. And so when I'm looking at this is, yes, there could be members from all these different advisory groups, but my understanding of the CAC would disband upon completion of the plan itself. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
okay, or like how Marion County did it. Okay.
We've almost tried to modularize it in a sense as part of that process so that we weren't saving the whole plan to be completely reviewed at the end, that we were giving all those engagements and processes.
Exactly.
So you kind of, your intro, whatever it was, you're checking that box and this one's kind of done and waiting now. This one's done and waiting, and it's been vetted all the way through work sessions with the board, right? So when it comes time for that final document to hit, everybody's already seen it, and it's in its pieces. Now that you'll see it in its entirety, and it won't be a surprise. You'll have had so many engagements that it's like, oh yeah, this looks familiar. It's now all in one pretty bow.
And they could have been the same people with like in our group, there could be a person from SWAC that's also on the scene. Thank you for that clarification, Daniel. I don't think the work but kind of walk through that level of detail. So thank you for that.
And I think to your point, Sean, too, that group can change and evolve as you're going through components of the SMMP, because you're going to have different levels of expertise and engagement on people throughout the community.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. That was really helpful context to see how that might functionally play out. It's really glad we have you here on on the group.
Yeah, and I think some of that's the fundamental design of your SWAC, our SWAMAC, is that we have tried to do 8 members from industry and 8 members from the public. So we
Yeah.
try to have a little bit of those different stakeholders, everything from the franchise haulers to disposal to recycling, every component kind of built in for all those different says.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I did notice that our SWAC is mainly community members, and there's only one representative on DSAC, which is our disposal site focus. So only one disposal representative. Sean.
Now back to the language. Can you explain a little bit more on why that CAC is only addressing areas of disagreement?
Yeah, so I can't explain the why that's the case, but this was based on a finding that we got from Sam. He was basically saying when in my experience there's a TAC and a CAC, the TAC does this and the CAC does this, and we said, oh, that's an interesting finding, so we wrote it down. And then this was the recommendation drawing from that finding. So the recommendation drawing from the finding doesn't necessarily have to be the same. Maybe we find based on Sam's feedback that the CAC looks this way, but our recommendation is, even though the CAC in the finding operates this way, maybe we want the CAC to operate another way.
I just didn't want to set this up as an adversarial, like you can only talk about things that these people don't agree on, as opposed to something like review the things they are in agreement with and disagree with. So it would just kind of hit something a little funky with me. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, we have this disagreement here and really a focused scope for this CAC group. And maybe that's another good point for a question for Brian is, you know, what do you see as the scope of this? And Ryan, I know you have a fair amount of experience in this world as well. If there's any insight you both have on kind of how the community members' scope is really framed.
Well, and I think part of what you're soliciting that's going to your technical advisory committee, right, is all that input from the public already. So hopefully they've had their full engagement. They've provided everything they had. So then it's the technical committee pulling it, in a sense, together. And then you do have back, you're given that community opportunity again to say, hey, there's some disagreement in interpretation or whatever, then you're re-engaging them again. In a sense, you're giving them, in a sense, another bite at something that's not determined yet.
So would it be good to say, you know, leave the areas of disagreement, but then also include some other and more general review or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fun part is you guys get to find it however you want. So
yeah. Okay. So I added in general review at the end, so it's not necessarily the scope is focused, because I think that's the important areas of disagreement, but then it is expanded to include more general review topics. Okay, so I think we have that pretty well addressing the more community engagement. I wanted to briefly go up to the other item that, well, I guess does that recommendation look good to everyone before we move on? Okay. So I want to go up to the other item that we talk about, who should be at the table. Just make sure that I'm just going to read it aloud, make sure that it captures what we're expecting here. Beyond those at the county, a wide assortment of stakeholders should be brought to the table. Stakeholders include community members, advocacy groups, businesses and industry, local and state government, and resources for innovation. See report for full stakeholder lists. The consultant should provide recommendations based on analysis and extensive outreach and engagement with community stakeholders from the who should be at the table list. These stakeholders should represent a broader area than Benton County. So one potential missing element that was called out early on was, you know, how this relates to the sort of regional approach, the inter-county communication. So is there does this sort of broad mention of, you know, it should represent a broader area than Benton County cover that? Or do we need to be any more specific? I think it might do the trick, but wanted to see what you all thought.
I read this as everyone under the sun. I don't, I mean, we're like, no offense, but I'm like, it says broader than Benton County. I respect someone else's, we're going to read and maybe, you know, wordsmith a little, but I don't, I mean, the only thing I'm missing here is the word equity, but it's also under community members. So I mean, I don't see anything missing about regional. That's my opinion.
I think you got everything on this. I mean, as soon as you say broader than Benton County, it's how far do you want to go?
Okay.
Because wasn't this, the note was more about rural Benton County and making sure that they're addressed?
Yeah. I think you're right. It was about rural Benton County. Let me double check here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's public engagement outside of the county, which is addressed, and then rural areas of the county. So let's just make sure we can add.
What about just updating the stakeholders list and just putting a note down at the bottom down there and say rural Benton County? I mean,
I think you're right. I think that's the way to do it. If anybody else has any concerns about that.
I like that.
Okay.
I mean, if I assume there's going to be a link, or if we're going to
Yep.
point them in that direction, put it all
Yeah.
in everything there. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, these are all going to be linked to the body of the document, so it'll be. So I'll put it in with this community bullet here.
Mhm.
Maybe residents and businesses from rural areas of the county. All right. So I think with that, we made it through findings and recommendations, 11:59. If you all have another quick moment, we just have to decide what we want to do. We obviously still have the body of the report to finalize. I do think we're pretty close. I don't think there's a ton to do, but there's little things like we have to kind of go through language and say what we like, make sure we accept changes, get rid of any kind of notes, or go through the comments and basically just say, yeah, we've addressed that comment adequately. We've added the findings we need, all of that. So back to this table, or sorry, back to the calendar that we looked at earlier. We have 2 more opportunities potentially to meet. Once next week, and then once on the Monday or Tuesday of the following week. Do we want to try to book 2 more meetings in so we can get a meeting time for like a work session just to go through this document, kind of like we did today, make sure everything is good, and then a final one the 2 days before the next draft is released, so we can just say, you know, go through it one last time and really just kind of poll and see how we feel about it. Yeah, Sean.
I think you did a fantastic job getting us through this today. And I'm curious if can it be let's schedule something like 90 minutes for next week and then see if we need a further one. And if we do, we do, and then that's totally fine. That would be my thought. I'm just throwing it out there.
I think that's a good approach. And generally, I mean, I guess what I'm leaning towards is saying, you know, if 10:30 to noon on the 8th works for the group, we can get that on the schedule. And then we can tentatively schedule something for the 13th or 14th, just so we have a placeholder, and we can, in the hopes that we can call it off, because, you know, we've been meeting just a tremendous amount. Yeah.
Yes, that's fine.
Good. I won't be able to play on the 8th, but don't hold it up for me.
I mean, I'm open Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, really any day next week. I can make it work, so it doesn't have to be Wednesday the 8th. I'd rather it work for everyone here. We have a small enough group to find a day that might work for all of us.
About the
Does
9th?
yeah.
Does the 9th work from 10:30 to noon?
the 9th from 10:30 to noon would definitely work for me.
John's saying no.
No,
Oh,
no.
that's still that's still the sustainability, and I'm on the coalitions, so it's all
Yep.
kind of prepping for that day. So the 9th is kind of whack for me, and I would recommend Daniel, just in case, to do if we do it on Tuesday in the afternoon, just in case there's a board issue that either you or someone else might need to do, or myself. They're usually done by noon.
Okay. Is there another time on like Monday or Wednesday that would work for the group?
I'm open Monday afternoon, late afternoon, Tuesday, and Wednesday before 4.
Yeah.
Well, let's go with the Monday late afternoon. Does like 3:30 to 5 work?
Yep.
I'll be out at a meeting. 3:30. I have a 3:30 to 5 standing meeting on Mondays, so
Okay.
don't stop it because of me. I mean, it's fine.
Well, let's try one more thing. So Sean mentioned Tuesday. What was your availability on Tuesday? Oh no.
I've got a legislature public hearing or a hearing on our Senate bill.
Okay. Well, how about this? So we two of us were good on 10:30 to noon on Wednesday, right? On the 8th. Brian, you're gonna be out. If it's okay with you to get your feedback, I'll send out the draft to everyone. Get feedback on anything, and we're gonna call findings and recommendations done for now, and the focus is just gonna be on the body of the report.
Okay, you bet.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all. I'll send out that invite, and I'll put together a doodle poll for the 13th or the 14th, just so we can have that as a day that might work.
Okay.
All
Great
right,
job,
thanks
Daniel.
everyone.
Great
Okay.
job. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Bye.